Norman Solomon has been an important part of Progressive Democrats of America and PD Sonoma for such a long time that it feels like I'm introducing my brother to my own family. And actually, that's exactly what's happening here tonight. We, the PD Sonoma family, are gathering to hear our brother tell us why he's running for Congress and asking us for his support for his campaign, for his family's support. He's here tonight because he is the candidate who can best continue the legacy of our longtime supporter and PDA Advisory Board member, Lynn Woolsey. The latest events in Washington, and there's such a long list, underscore our need for members of Congress to stand their ground for progressive principles, and we know that Norman is someone who has shown for decades that he won't back down. He will represent the core principles that are at the heart of PDA for all of us, no matter what district we live in, no matter what state we live in, when he's elected to Congress. It gives me such pleasure to introduce our brother, Norman Solomon.
Well, I want to thank Sister Alice for that introduction. You know, Tim Carpenter talks about the PDA family, and you know, we will set aside the reality that families don't always function as well as everyone wishes. But the point is there, and it's that we are trying to accomplish together sort of a transcendent possibility that is with us and is often, to put it mildly, suppressed in our society. You know, we have this option now to move beyond the discouragement of the last couple of years that many of us have felt. Like a trolley, there's a new election that's going to come along. And the question is, what sort of new formulation we're going to create so that we're not simply choosing from choices that are handed down from us, but we're creating new choices. The Solomon for Congress campaign is about to open its headquarters in San Rafael. And I'm not, as my wife Cheryl Higgins would tell you, I'm not the most visually sophisticated about interior decoration or anything. I'm sort of a word person. But I do have in mind one sign that I'd like us to put up there. And I'll defer to my colleagues as to exactly where and exactly how large the sign should be. But it's going to say this. The sign is going to say, "This is not happening to us. We are making this happen." It's a simple concept, but when we step back from it, we are apt to realize how much that we've been acculturated, yes, through the mass media especially, to assume that history is something that is given to us and that we have a consumer role. We pull it off the shelf like Wonder Bread, or no, we'll take this wheat bread or whatever. And yet today we have this concentric set of crises that are causing a lot of people a lot of despair. And it's also caused a lot of, I think, confusion that from many quarters is intentional. Those, for instance, within the Democratic Party who we call blue dogs, or I should say, they call themselves blue dogs. There's something called the Blue Dog Coalition. And that is a tendency in our own party that tries to conciliate and conciliate with an immovable wall called the so-called leadership of the Republican Party in Congress. And let's face it, the Democratic Party has always been fraught with fundamental contradictions. When I was growing up, we had advocate for civil rights in the early 1960s like Hubert Humphrey, and then we had Dixiecrats. Did I say Dixie Cats? Dixiecrats. And then a little bit later, we had George McGovern, we had Eugene McCarthy, we had Robert Kennedy, and we had Scoop Jackson. Today we have Rahm Emanuel and we have Lynn Woolsey. So our party has always had these very diffuse characteristics and tendencies. And there's been an effort sometimes to say, well, we should just be one happy tent together, one big happy tent, and not have a debate. But there's a reason that primaries were invented. If we didn't have a primary, we wouldn't have a primary fight, for instance, we wouldn't have Donna Edwards in Congress today. She had the temerity to take on a sitting Democrat in the House who was a blue dog. And because of grassroots organizing, she today is in the House of Representatives and a leader of the Progressive Caucus. We have time after time, including here at home in the North Bay, where Mark Leno challenged a sitting state senator and raised issues, and there was a strong primary challenge, and we got the result that we needed. More broadly, in terms of the politics of what's going on in Washington, we have this situation now where we're getting a lot of messages that the good Democrats are the ones who go along to get along with Republicans. And I think that's bass-backwards. The good Democrats are those who fight the right-wing corporate military agenda of the Republican Party. The authentic Democrats are those who have been willing and able to challenge the myth of accommodation to the point of capitulation. We don't believe in capitulation. We believe in fighting for our principles day in and day out. And when we look at the agenda now in Washington, it's mind-blowing. Defund Medicaid, putting Social Security and Medicare on the table and sharpening the knives quite audibly, perpetuating and even expanding what Martin Luther King called the warfare state. We now are in 5 different wars, and perhaps more to follow, and we're told that's defense. We are now in a so-called austerity environment where from county to state to national government, there is a concerted push to put not only Wall Street over Main Street, but to acculturate us to normalize what should be totally unacceptable. The idea that students can't even get their core courses some of the times at SRJC, that's supposed to be considered normal. The idea that we don't have funding to protect our natural environment, that's being normalized as well. The idea that war should be going on and on and on, and now that something called a super Congress of 12 people are supposed to hot rod in through a new austerity set of measures that will shred what we have to be proud of in many respects from the New Deal and the Great Society. The Great Society that was destroyed by the escalation of the wars in Southeast Asia. And we know that from that time to this and before, it was Democrats who stood up, who were willing to challenge the party establishment, including the president, that made it possible to present a moral challenge to an immoral war. In 1969, the Nobel-winning biologist George Wald gave a speech at MIT. He went over from Harvard to give this talk, which became very famous. It was reprinted in the Boston Globe and elsewhere. And he said, "Our government is in the business of killing." That was true in 1969, and unfortunately it's true in 2011. And we have, I think, a tremendous challenge to bring to the fore the possibilities of electoral democracy, and that means doing it from the ground up. It means, as that sign that we're going to put in the office says, this isn't happening to us. We're going to make it happen because, pardon the expression, we have faith in democracy. I know it may sound naive to some people, but isn't that really all that we have? That's the only potential we really have to turn this around. We're living, as we know, under corporatocracy. We're living under what Dwight Eisenhower called a military-industrial complex, and it's way worse than it was when he uttered those words in 1961. Passivity is not an option. Acceptance is not an option. And when we consider these concentric problems, I mean, we can go on all night, and I won't, about the magnitude and the quantity of massive problems that we're facing. It would be, I think, an omission to not mention climate change. How profound for future generations this abdication of responsibility is in Washington. Remember 2.5 years ago how global warming, we were told, was a vital issue for the future of the planet, and it was, and it is. As the bumper sticker says, nature bats last. It doesn't matter what politicians decide to backburner in Washington. Nature will continue to do as nature is doing, raising the parts per million of carbon dioxide now to 390, still going in the wrong direction. the cave-ins to Wall Street, throwing habeas corpus and other elements of the Bill of Rights under the bus, more and more spending on military spending, not defense spending, but military spending, which is way larger than any legitimate or needed defense. We now hear that the administration is fighting to cut Medicaid appropriations around the country to state, and we experience what that means for Medi-Cal in this state. The abrogation of the human right of health care is everywhere around us. We live in a society of, in a sense, healthcare apartheid, and we know that with the insurance, hospital, and pharmaceutical industries being kept at the center of healthcare provision, or I should say healthcare denial, because that's what they're about, that maximizes their profits. Our insurance companies not in the business of denying healthcare rather than helping to provide it. In these ways and so many others, we have these concentric realms of crisis. And at the core, I believe, are two fundamentals: the massive overabundance of corporate power and the dire shortage of democracy. And this campaign for Congress is very much about mobilizing to transform those two cores that now are really at the center of our very vast and multifaceted problems. When we look at through the details of the district, I've been asked tonight to say a little bit about that. It looks like we know what the district is, which is always helpful. What is being called now the 2nd Congressional District will be all of Marin County, western and very northern Sonoma County. So we are in this 2nd District here in Sebastopol, and that'll be the case in Petaluma and Healdsburg and Cloverdale. And apparently Mike Thompson, if he is able to, will be representing in the next Congress cities in Sonoma County, including Rohnert Park and Cotati and Santa Rosa. But our district, Marin, Western Sonoma, will also include Mendocino, Humboldt, Del Norte, and Trinity counties. And so I've been getting my maps out. We got a tour scheduled up there right around Labor Day week, and we're getting to know, and it would not surprise you to hear that day after day we're learning just how many progressives live in those counties. This is a progressive district. This is a district that should be a voice for the progressive values that are essential not just as some sort of politics, but really to be able to live in a country that we're proud of. Right? We want to be proud of our country. Sometimes we are, sometimes we aren't. But everything we can be proud of in the United States is because of social movements. And I think I want to close on that note. You know, people talk about how politicians give off sort of a bad smell ethically. And I'm not going to argue that one way or the other in general. Politicians vary in terms of who they are, and how they function. But the reality is, I believe that a huge problem with, in general, with few exceptions, elected officials in Washington is that they didn't come out of social movements. You know, it sort of reminds me of what was said about George W. Bush. No, his dad, actually, George Herbert Walker Bush. It was said he was born on third base and thinks he hit a triple. And does that not describe inherited wealth and corporate power in the United States? But still in all, we're in a situation now where so many people in high positions of government power believe that when something good happens it's because they did something good. And yet you look at history and everything that we treasure in our own country, whether it's Social Security or Medicare or civil rights laws or gay rights laws or women's rights, the capacity which has been so curtailed of the EPA to protect the environment, but to whatever extent we can be proud of so much that's been achieved and is still in place in our society, the elected officials were the icing on the cake. They were those who were willing to listen and then respond to the pressure of social movements. Whether we talk about FDR, we talk about LBJ, it wasn't LBJ, as important as his role was, who brought us the civil rights laws. It was people whose names we know and more people whose names we don't know, who were part of social movements, who had that faith to build day after day, to do the activities that the media ignore or denigrate, to do the activities that aren't paid for, to do the activities that are morally uplifting and financially enervating quite often, and exhausting, you know. And I'm sometimes asked this question, I'm asked more and more, gee, are you tired? Are you feeling tired? And my answer is, I'm not only feeling tired, I'm feeling extremely, extremely tired. I'm feeling so extremely tired of living in a country that's a warfare state. You know? I'm so tired of this rip-off operation in Washington to steal from elderly people Medicare. That is just a crime in process. I'm tired of seeing that rationalized by the Democratic Party while the Republican Party is leading the heist. I'm really sick of that. I am sick and tired of that, and I bet you are too. Yeah. And I could go on and on and on, and the reality is we have a reason to be not only sick and tired, but to be outraged. And we all know the saying, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention, or what is one permutation of that is, don't get mad, get even, right? Well, I don't know about the get even part. I think we have reasons to be angry. And the reality is that, as blues musicians say at their expression, it's quite applicable. The expression is, you may feel like you're getting lost, but you won't if you know the blues. And let's face it, you know, electoral politics and the whole thing, and by the way, PDA is such a bright spot in the electoral politics world, isn't it? I mean, let's... And we're operating in a context that, should we say, sometimes we feel like there's a little bit of sliminess around in the political economy of elections that we need to, you know, work our way through and hopefully push back on and navigate and push through with ideals and find ways that progressives can win for our social ideals. But we're in this context where the possibilities are really there, but there's a lot of static around, and there's a lot of distractions. You know, there's a saying, media can't tell you what to think, but it can tell you what to think about. You know? And so a lot of times we're finding ourselves, these issues are so complicated. There's all these sort of factions that emerge, and so we may feel like we're getting lost. We won't get lost if we remember the message of Martin Luther King in 1967 and 1968. We won't get lost if we remember that human rights is a candle that is always burning. If we can remember that the static is just that, if we can remember that the confusions that are an inevitable part of doing this sort of political work are just that. They're confusions, and you know the saying goes, wisdom is right on the edge of confusion. I think we have a lot of confusion. We have a lot of possibilities, but more profound and more overarching than any of that, we have a lot of wisdom, which is hard won. And I think PDA as an organization in Sonoma County and nationwide has accumulated through theory and practice a whole lot of wisdom. And it's with us not in some abstract way. We've gained it because we've lived it, and we've made mistakes, and we've gained from them, and we've moved forward. Dr. King talked about the paralysis of analysis. The only surefire way to know that you're doing the right thing is to not do anything, paradoxically. And I know this as a writer. It's very easy to look at the computer screen at the end of the day, you put down some words, you think, wow, I sort of have this figured out. Well, we don't have everything figured out. We learn through actually proceeding to move beyond what Dr. King called the paralysis of analysis, and that means action. And that means we're making this happen. And that means that we won't get lost because our eyes are on the prize. We believe in human rights. We believe that health care is a human right. We believe in health care, not warfare. And we believe in democracy. And that's what this campaign is all about. Thank you very much. Thank you.